In this story, you'll follow a young American named Jack as he steps onto the lawns of Oxford University, carrying questions shaped by recent politics. While you listen, you'll pick up English phrases and sentence structures just by feeling the scene, not by studying a textbook. If that sounds good, subscribe, like, and comment to be part of this journey where language learning feels real and alive. Jack arrived on a sunny morning. He had flown from a small town in Pennsylvania to England. He carried a suitcase, a notebook, and more questions than answers. He believed in freedom of speech, just like so many voices back home. But now, standing in Oxford, he wondered whether that freedom had limits. How did ideas survive here, in a place steeped in centuries of learning? He walked slowly across the famous High Street. Ancient stones paved his way. The buildings reached skyward, their spires pointing at history. He passed the Bodleian Library, with its large wooden doors and small windows reflecting sunlight. Tourists, students, and people in suits moved around him like leaves in a breeze. His feet took him toward Radcliffe Square, the heart of the university. He stood at the center, with his notebook in hand, uncertain of what to write. The dome of the Radcliffe Camera glowed in pale stone. The air smelled of old books, grass, and conversations just ending. He sat on a bench beneath a tree. A steady breeze moved the leaves above him. He watched students walk by, heads down, focused on phones or notebooks. Some stopped, looked at maps, or talked in foreign languages. He felt small and curious. Jack remembered the campaign back home. He remembered rallies and speeches. He remembered how one voice promised simple solutions to complex problems. It was a voice that said America first, that ignored experts, that shifted the rules of debate. Now he wondered, what did America first mean here in Oxford? Did freedom of speech protect shouting into a megaphone? Or were there consequences when words disregarded others? A robin landed on a nearby bench. It chirped softly and hopped off. Jack closed his eyes. He wrote 3 words in his notebook, curious. Open. Unsure. He walked again, this time toward one of the older colleges, University College. The gates were open. He stepped inside the courtyard. He saw groups of students in dark robes. They laughed softly. A fountain gurgled in the middle. The grass was bright green. Jack settled on a stone ledge and looked around. He took a deep breath. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket and opened a news app. The headlines were still full of populist speeches, anti-establishment chants, accusations against universities for being elitist. Jack read them, but now Oxford's silence made them feel distant. Here, knowledge seemed patient. It gave time for thinking, time for context. He shut the phone and closed his eyes again. He felt the stone under his fingers. Warm, smooth, ancient. He opened his notebook and wrote. Words matter, but so does context. Someone from home would say that talking louder makes you right. Someone here seemed to say that talking without thought makes you wrong. He left the courtyard and passed through the Queen's Lane-covered passages. Small shops sold postcards, pens, books about famous alumni, politicians, writers, scientists. Jack picked up a small volume titled Freedom and Responsibility. He flipped through it. He read a quote, "Speech without reflection is hollow noise." He underlined it in his mind. He walked toward the river. The Charwell flowed quietly, slow and calm. On a small punt, students guided flatboats along the water. They wore jackets and rolled their sleeves. They steered with long poles, hard-soled shoes pressing against the stern. Jack watched for a long time, then sat nearby on a stone wall. He looked across the river, trees, bridges, buildings, bicycles locked to racks. He saw in that reflection both the student punting and himself, an American visitor trying to learn. He wrote again, "Learning is like punting. You need push, balance, direction." Jack realized that his country's debates lacked balance. They pushed hard, direction varied, but reflection was missing. Here, silence and space mattered. He returned to the high street. Shadows grew longer. Jack didn't take many photos. He didn't need them. The images were now in his heart. The dome, the robes, the river. And now, the notebook held his first lessons. As the sky turned orange, he found himself outside a college cafeteria. He could smell roasted vegetables and warm bread. He sat at a small wooden table and ordered a simple meal. His English sounded softer through an Oxford accent. But they understood him. He didn't feel out of place. He ate slowly. Each bite tasted richer than he expected. He wrote one final sentence for the day. Oxford listens. America shouts. He paused. He didn't judge yet. He just wrote. He closed the notebook, paid his bill, and walked back toward his lodging. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe he'd attend a lecture on politics. Maybe he'd explore another lane. Maybe he'd write more. But he knew this. He was here to listen, to learn, to see what lay beneath the noise of his homeland. Because sometimes the strongest voice is the one that listens first. Jack woke up to the soft chiming of church bells echoing through the stone streets. Morning light poured through the window of his small room, painting gold on the books piled next to his bed. He hadn't planned to stay this long in Oxford, but something about the place held him. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a deeper understanding. Downstairs in the breakfast hall, he sat alone with a cup of black coffee. Around him, students discussed topics he didn't yet understand: international law, post-colonial theory, artificial intelligence. One girl mentioned she was writing an essay on the collapse of shared truth. Jack paused. That phrase struck him. What did it mean to lose a shared truth? Did people back home still agree on basic facts? He remembered watching a political debate online where the moderator struggled to hold the candidates to reality. One claimed crime was higher than ever, while data said otherwise. Another interrupted every sentence, ignoring the facts completely. People cheered anyway. Now in Oxford, facts were everything. Arguments needed sources. Claims were challenged. Here, truth wasn't something you shouted. It was something you defended. Later that morning, Jack joined a free public lecture at the Sheldonian Theater. The hall was majestic, filled with arches and painted ceilings. A visiting professor from Spain spoke about the danger of speed in political culture. Jack listened carefully. Populism, the professor said, simplifies. It promises clarity in a world that is, by nature, complex. It offers answers before asking the right questions. Jack wrote that down in his notebook. It felt painfully familiar. The professor continued, Academia doesn't give you slogans. It gives you tools. Tools to examine, to question, to doubt. And doubt, real intellectual doubt, is the beginning of understanding. Jack looked around. Some students were taking notes furiously. Others were nodding quietly. No one shouted. No one stood to argue. The professor's voice filled the room like a gentle wave. This was not a performance. It was an offering. After the lecture, Jack walked alone to Christ Church Meadow. The grass stretched wide under the open sky. Families picnicked. A dog barked in the distance. 2 students sat on a bench, quietly reading. Jack opened his notebook again. He didn't write anything for several minutes. He just stared at the page, watching the wind flip it. Finally he wrote, Back home, doubt is weakness. Here, it's the beginning of wisdom. As he walked past the river, Jack thought about how quickly people back home pick sides. Red or blue. Us or them. Patriot or traitor? He remembered how a friend had been mocked for questioning a certain political view. You read too much, someone had told him. Just follow your gut. Jack had laughed then. Now he frowned. He wondered, what happens to a country that stops questioning? What happens when slogans replace thinking? In the afternoon, Jack entered the Ashmolean Museum. He wandered through ancient sculptures, paintings, maps of empires long gone. One room held political posters from the early 20th century. He stared at a bold red one that said, "Power belongs to the loudest voice." He disagreed now. Maybe power should belong to the quietest mind. He passed through a room filled with old manuscripts. One display featured letters between scholars from different countries during wartime. They disagreed on many things, religion, politics, science. But they still wrote to each other with respect. One wrote, "I am not afraid of your disagreement. I am afraid of silence." Jack underlined that in his notebook. That evening, he found a small cafe tucked behind a bookstore. It was warm inside. The walls were covered with shelves of second-hand books, old photos, and handwritten menus. Jack sat at a wooden table, sipping hot tea and reading from a book he had bought earlier, Thinking in Public. One chapter described the responsibility of citizens in a democracy. Not just to vote, but to listen, to study, to engage, not blindly follow slogans, but to understand the consequences of ideas. Jack closed the book. He looked out the window. The street outside was quiet now. A cyclist passed, wrapped in a scarf. A few students walked together, heads bowed, talking softly. Back home, the streets would be louder. There would be flags, bumper stickers, and angry conversations in diners. People shouting about freedom, but not listening to each other. He wrote in his notebook again, "Democracy dies in noise, not in silence." He didn't know where he stood politically anymore. But he knew one thing. He didn't want to be certain. He wanted to keep asking. He wanted to live in a country where questions were not insults. That night, he lay in bed, unable to sleep. The quiet pressed in. He thought about truth, about power, about the words leaders used, words that inspired or divided. He thought about how universities could seem distant to many back home, cold, arrogant, out of touch. But here, in Oxford, Jack didn't see arrogance. He saw discipline. He saw people spending years to study problems that couldn't be solved in a tweet. He turned and looked at his notebook one last time. He had written one word in the corner. Humility. It seemed like the beginning of a new chapter. He closed his eyes, the sound of rain beginning to tap gently against the old glass window. Jack stood in front of a large blackboard in a quiet seminar room. Only 10 students were there, and one professor, an older woman with silver hair, a soft voice, and eyes that had clearly read thousands of pages. The discussion topic was, "What is truth in modern democracy?" Jack wasn't sure why he had come. He wasn't enrolled in the course, but the door was open, and the professor had nodded when he peeked in. So he stayed. The students began with definitions. Some quoted philosophers, Habermas, Foucault, Rawls. Jack didn't recognize the names, but he listened. One girl said, "Truth has become emotional currency. People don't want to be right, they want to feel right." The professor smiled gently. "Good. So if truth is emotional, how do we protect it?" Silence. Jack's heart beat faster. He didn't want to speak. He wasn't sure he belonged here. But he raised his hand. "I'm from the U.S.," he said slowly. "Back home, people say truth is what feels real. Facts don't matter if they don't fit their side. It's all about loyalty, tribe over truth." The room was silent again. A few students nodded. The professor looked at him kindly. "And how do you feel about that?" she asked. Jack swallowed. Scared. Because I don't know how to talk to people anymore. I don't know how to disagree without making enemies. The professor wrote one word on the board. Dialogue. That's the tool, she said. It's not easy. It's not quick. But it's how we survive. Jack sat back. He felt like something heavy had shifted in him. Not fallen, but moved. Made space for something new. After class, one of the students invited him to a nearby pub. They sat around a long table, students from Poland, Nigeria, Canada, China. They ordered fries and ginger beer. They talked about their countries, their struggles with political chaos, and how universities often seemed like castles far from real problems. Jack said, sometimes, back home, Oxford is seen as fake, privileged, like it doesn't understand working people. The student from Canada said, same. But maybe the problem isn't the place, it's the gap between the place and the people. Jack nodded. How do we bridge that gap? The Nigerian student said, we tell better stories. We don't just say facts, we say why they matter. That sentence stuck in Jack's mind all night. He walked home under a cloudy sky. The streets glistened from recent rain. The sound of his shoes echoed in the narrow lanes. He thought of speeches he had heard back in the U.S., speeches full of anger, promises, blame. Then he thought of today's seminar. No shouting, no slogans, just questions, just learning. At his desk, he opened his notebook and wrote. Shouting is easy. Explaining is hard. Learning is slow but real. The next day, he boarded a train to London. It was time to head home soon, but before leaving the country, he wanted to see something else. As the train rolled through fields and suburbs, Jack watched the countryside blur past. He thought about how fast everything moved back home. Not just traffic, but thoughts, opinions. Everyone rushed to react. No one waited. No one reflected. At Paddington Station, he walked into the crowd. London was louder, faster, more chaotic. He passed people in suits, school kids with backpacks, protesters shouting about immigration, and tourists staring at their phones. It felt more familiar, but less safe. He walked past a bookstore and saw a title in the window, The Death of Listening. He didn't go in. He already knew what it would say. That evening, he found a small bench near the Thames. The water was dark and slow. The buildings along the river lit up as the sky turned purple. He opened his notebook for one last time. He wrote, I don't know all the answers, but I know this. Truth is quiet. Power should be kind. Doubt is not weakness. And learning takes time. He closed the notebook and looked up at the sky. Somewhere across the ocean, his friends were probably watching political talk shows, sending tweets, arguing at dinner. He didn't judge them, but he had changed. Back in Pennsylvania, people would ask him what he learned in Oxford. He wouldn't say much. Just one thing. It's okay not to know. Just keep asking better questions. The next morning, Jack boarded a plane and flew home. And in his bag, under his clothes, next to his passport, rested a small, worn notebook full of questions, thoughts, and a new kind of truth. Not a loud truth, but a lasting one. You just followed Jack's full journey, from confusion to curiosity, from slogans to reflection. And as you listened, your brain was learning real English, natural phrases, advanced structures, and cultural insight, all in a way that felt like watching a movie. That's the power of story. If you liked learning this way, subscribe to our channel for more exciting English learning stories. New ones drop every day. Don't forget to like the video if it helped you, and tell us in the comments. What do you think makes truth powerful? See you in the next story.